Well, it says about 79,300 hits.
It's got almost everything apart from SARS. So let's try the QCA.
Catherine Davis and Stephen Williams are both newly qualified teachers working in primary schools. Each is planning a key Stage 2 science lesson on rocks and soils and using resources from the internet to help with their planning. In this programme, we'll see them planning and teaching their lesson and look at what others can learn from their internet experience. Stephen and Catherine are both in their first year as teachers. One of the tutors on their postgraduate course was Alan Howe, and he's giving them some last-minute advice about using the web in their planning.
What I hope to see is that Catherine and Stephen both focusing on scientific inquiry as a really important part of science. So the children will be learning about the topic of rocks and soils, but what they should also be doing is thinking about how children are going to do some practical work, to investigate, to ask questions, to carry out tests, and to really get the children thinking like scientists.
So how much water are you going to put on? A lot of water or a little bit? A little bit, right.
There's going to be a number of constraints. Time is going to be one. I'm not sure how much time they've got or are able to give to this particular topic. Under the new guidelines, the primary strategy from the DFES, they may choose to do this work in some depth or maybe with a lighter touch. They'll be thinking about particular activities for the age group. Catherine has a mixed age group, so that's going to give her another challenge. So she'll have quite a wide range of abilities, as may indeed Stephen have a range of abilities in his class, so differentiation will be another issue that they need to think about. They're going to come across an awful lot of websites out there. Some are going to be useful and some not so. So it'll be very interesting to see how well they sift through all the information that's available and how long it takes them to see whether they can use the websites efficiently and effectively.
What advice about using the internet for preparing lessons would Alan pass on?
One of the tips is really just to remember the national curriculum at the start and to go right back to the start and identify the learning objectives before you decide upon all the activities. And I think the other key tip is to find a really good context for the children so you can set their work in an interesting way, an interesting story, or to identify a really good reason for them working on rocks and soils. But I think what you've said about starting with the children's interests and their own collections is a really good idea. Another thing is to recognise that out there on the internet there's a lot of specialist material and specialist interest groups. All sorts of people put things out on the internet that they suggest might be useful for teachers.
You can get bogged down. It might be really interesting, but
not
you're
necessarily
wasting your time by
appropriate.
looking at it kind of thing, because it isn't. It won't be useful for the children. It won't be useful for your lesson, but it's really interesting to read.
So your time's limited, and you need to use that wisely. Where do you two do your preparation?
Alan emphasised the importance of scientific inquiry and investigation. He talked about the need to find a good context for the lesson and time management. There are lots of websites out there. But most of all, he stressed the need to go back to the national curriculum and learning objectives. Catherine's begun her search with the DFES standards site. Then she goes to the link to the QCA to look at the scheme of work for the science unit on rocks and soil.
For me, for these topics, it's the starting point because that's the unit that I've been given to teach my class that term. It's got all of the objectives that they need to cover for this particular unit, and it's also then got some ideas as well which I can build on. This is the lesson that I'm going to be teaching. The differences between rocks can be identified by testing, and the possible teaching activity says compare rocks in terms of how easily they are worn away, help children to carry out a rubbing test to compare how well different rocks withstand being ground down, and record results.
Now she's sorted out the learning objective, the differences between rocks can be identified by testing, she's moving on to sites that might help with lesson plans.
The first thing that I do is to go onto Google and just type in some relevant words. So I'd start with rocks and soil. Well, it says about 79,300 hits, which is a bit daunting. So I just kind of glance down and have a look, see which ones look like they're going to be most relevant to me. Right, I'm going to narrow the search down a little bit because rocks and soils is a little bit broad. So I'll put in primary science as well. There's one here for tsn.org.uk, which is Teacher Science Network. So it's got lesson plan 1. I can see here it says demo porosity, so this is relevant to the lesson that I'm going to be teaching. There are lots of ideas on here that I'll be able to use, so I think I'll print this one off and keep looking and see if I can find anything else to fill in any gaps that this lesson plan might have.
Stephen's planning a lesson on soil. He's following up children's questions from last week, so he's got a clear context. He's starting with the National Curriculum website.
I'm just going to try and find out what I need to teach my children, what kind of skills they need to learn, and inquiry questions and things like that. So I'm just going to click on the science topic.
He's got the learning objectives from Curriculum Online, but now he needs to go to other sites to look for resources to teach the lesson.
Teachernet.gov.uk is quite a useful site. I used it a lot when I was training because it isn't just for science, it's for lots of different things, lessons, it's got resource ideas, it's got chat rooms, kind of notice boards and things like that. It's got almost everything apart from soils. So let's try the QCA. The National Curriculum, written a scheme of work from it, and have taken the skills that the National Curriculum require and the breadth of study, the things that we need to have a look at, and written learning objectives, suggested activities and things like that. So it's a very good resource, especially for an NQT. It makes the job easier.
I'll go to teachingideas.co.uk because I've used them before for literacy and things, and they've been quite helpful.
The lesson will have a lot of hands-on investigation, but she wants to end it with a science website she's found at the BBC.
It was way on the computer of testing all different sorts of rock in a similar way that we're going to do tomorrow, and I thought I could use that in the plenary at the end.
Now the lesson plan is taking shape. It's taken her just over an hour.
We'll talk about some of the words we used last week to describe the rocks, just to get them back into the topic. I'm going to introduce them to the worksheet that I'll have for them. Then they'll work in groups of about 3 to test the rocks that they've selected. And then for the plenary at the end, I'm going to use the BBC website, which basically does the same investigation that we'll have been doing practically, but does it virtually on the computer using the projector in a laptop.
I've just found a really good worksheet, kind of pro forma for examining soils. Getting the children to ask, trying to discover, well, what colour is the soil, the texture, so that they'll actually be able to feel the soil. It's a resource on primaryresources.co.uk, and I've just gone through using their links and things like that, and the lesson plans that they have on there. I'm going to probably start off with showing them pictures of different kinds of soils and things like that, and possibly some soil from around here. Then we'll introduce different kinds of ways that we could analyse soil. I'll let them then go off, examine the soil, feel the texture. I'll probably do an example of how to feel the texture of a soil. In groups or in pairs, I'll get them to fill in this possible table, just to find out and explore the soil for themselves, and leave a box for them to ask their own question, so that they're actually thinking, well, what do I want to find out myself about this soil? And then we'll probably come back and see what they've discovered and learned. We're looking at soil today as a result of the lesson last week and people questioning about soil. And just ever so quietly, just share your thoughts of a good question that you could ask with the person next to you, please. I want to see who can come up with the best question to find out more about the soil. Okay, I said your mission, if you choose to accept it, are you accepting this mission?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. The worksheets that they did, it was generally copied from a website, and then I reworded some of the questions, make it more suitable for them. Orange concrete. It was good to see them thinking about what kind of questions to ask and really exploring and examining the soil with magnifying glasses.
Do we have to answer the questions that we ask?
Oh yes, you're exploring it. If you can't find an answer, then we can try and find together, okay? Be efficient with your time on the web. Don't go off on tangents and waste time looking at things that might interest you but aren't related to the learning objective. But also, be adventurous. We could have just shown pictures and things like that with a lesson. Don't just use the internet, but also use practical, physical things in science lessons. It's essential.
The whole lesson kind of came from lots of different places rather than just one particular site. So, I mean, the whole suggestion of an investigation and everything was really nice, and getting them to look at different things, you know, the porosity and the hardness of the rock as well. Did the water go into the rock? No, it didn't. Right. Okay, so you can write that down on your sheet. I was really pleased with the website that we used at the end because it really consolidated everything that they learned and gave me an opportunity to talk about some of the new vocabulary that we'd learned at the beginning of the lesson and them a chance to use it. Oh, straight to the bottom. Never go with just one idea that you get from the internet because it's never going to apply completely to your class because every class is different. You know, there are loads of good ideas and resources that you can use, like this one. It gets the children's interest going again when they're sort of feeling a bit sluggish because they've been working all morning. I would also say be brave. The first time I used the projector I was nervous, but now I've seen how well it works and so I'm using it more and more often, and you know, the children get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and I do as well because it's quite an easy resource to teach from.
And what does Alan Howe make of their work?
The first thing is it was good to see them use a variety of sites. They didn't take one off-the-shelf lesson, but they looked around and they made a bespoke lesson that fitted the needs of their particular children in their class. They both used practical activities in their lessons, both incorporated lots of hands-on science. It would have been quite tempting for Catherine to use that virtual testing website instead of practical work, but she used it to consolidate the children's learning after they'd had some real hands-on activity with some real rocks. We saw them using three sorts of website. There was the curriculum information websites where they really focused on the learning objectives in the first instance. Then they went on to lesson planning activity sites that gave them lots of ideas, the ways that they could present the learning objective to the children. And then there was the subject knowledge websites where the teachers could develop their own understanding of the subject.
So if you're an NQT and want to use the web, remember, begin with the curriculum and the learning objectives for the lesson you're teaching. Find an interesting context for the lesson and plan your time. Don't get carried away on the web. If you want more information about the programme, just go to the Teachers TV website and click on the programme title.